Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 13th of April of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. But before we start, I would like to remind you that exactly a year ago the Russian cruiser Moscow was sunk in the Black Sea as a result of missile attack from the Ukrainian side. That attack dealt a lot of damage to Russian naval forces in the Black Sea and to the Russian reputation. Furthermore, Russian intelligence provided more updates and more information about the possible union between Poland and Zelensky. If you remember, a few weeks ago, Zelensky visited Poland to sign some papers. My projection was that Zelensky tried to get some obligation from the Poland side if the Ukrainians would be defeated during the counter-offensive operation in Zaporozhye area. He wanted to receive some obligation from the Poland side that they would enter the western part of Ukraine and will support the Ukrainians in the case of failure. Currently, today, the Russian intelligence gave more information about the situation. They're saying that Zelensky visited Poland to sign a final draft of a possible union between Poland and Ukraine. And as you know, Ukrainians are not able to join European Union and the NATO because of the war with Russia. But Ukraine can become a part of a member of these unions, and the closest member to Ukraine is Poland. So if the Ukrainians can create some kind of configuration and become a part of Poland, at least for some period of time, they can become automatically a part of European Union and the NATO. So that was the information from different Russian sources who were discussing this situation during the day. So we'll see whether it's true or not. Furthermore, when talking about the Russians, they also provided some kind of answer to this situation. For example, on the 11th of April of 2023, Russia's strategic missile forces have conducted a successful launch of a ballistic missile from the Kapustin Yar test range in the Astrakhan region. So that was the answer. They were saying, and the message was, if they are going to do something like this, we're going to use our missiles and nobody are able to stop us. Now let's go to Bakhmut. Let's talk about Artyomovsk, because there are also a lot of very interesting updates, and you can see that there are changes in the north part of the western area. But before we start discussing the situation today, we'll give you another message from Prigozhin, the head of Wagner's. Today he reported that since the beginning of the special military operation for Wagner's, and they joined this operation in March of 2022, they managed to destroy up to 38,000 soldiers of Ukrainian forces. So just Wagner's. 38,000 soldiers. And when talking about the entire loss of Ukrainians, we know that recently the Ministry of Defense of NATO countries and military authorities of NATO countries provided that Ukrainians lost since the beginning of the special military operation something around 140,000 soldiers. So that means that just Wagner's managed to destroy something around 33% of Ukrainian entire losses. So this is a very big input into a common goal of Russian forces in this special military operation. So, and also he added that from 38,000 soldiers, around 32,000 soldiers were killed in the vicinity of Solidar and Bakhmut, so exactly in this area. Furthermore, some military Russian experts are saying that during 1 month of battle in the vicinity of Bakhmut and Solidar, the Ukrainians loses up to 11,000 soldiers. So this is around 2.5 brigades. The losses are very heavy and very hard. Furthermore, the Ukrainians, for example, today, some sources reported that they continue sending more and more reserves inside of Bakhmut. For example, today we got update that Ukrainians deployed 120th Brigade in the vicinity of the western part of Bakhmut, in the area that was under control of special forces, and another 114th Brigade in the vicinity, let's say, on the area of the roads that connects Chasov Yar and Bakhmut. So we see that Ukrainians continue sending more and more, we can say, very low quality forces. They're not saying they're mechanized brigades or special forces. They're just sending more and more infantry, and the main purpose of that infantry to hold the Russians as long as possible. Furthermore, the Russian sources map has been updated, as you can see, and I believe that you saw a video for today when the Ukrainians, when they were defeated in the central part of Bakhmut, they were stepping back and they took a decision, the Ukrainians, to destroy the big buildings. and I believe you saw a video of the destroying and the explosion on the very big building. It was like 9 or more floors building, and this very important tactic from the Ukrainian side. They understand that they can't hold Bakhmut, they need to step back, but the only possible solution for them is to slow down the Russians and not to allow them to take their own positions. So that's why they took a decision to destroy the big buildings. And of course, this situation will affect the entire plan, the Russians' plan in the vicinity of Bakhmut. We understand that. The Russians can continue movements just along the residential area where they can find low buildings, because if they attack and storm the big buildings, sooner or later anyway those buildings would be destroyed by the Ukrainians. So there is no reason to do this. The best solution for them is to encircle these areas and try to Ukrainians to step back and later to pass them by without any stop or something like this. And as you can see, this map has been updated. According to this map, we see that the Russians have almost established control over the northern part, and according to this map, the Russians managed to penetrate and to pass by the Rose Avenue, and there were very heavy clashes along the streets, Victory Street and Green Street, these two streets. And now the Russians, according to this map, currently reached the Krainie Street, this line, and we can say that the Russians have already got the vicinity of the barracks and in the central part of Bakhmut that we were talking about yesterday. Furthermore, the Russian source map has been updated as well. Now they're showing that this railroad station is in the gray zone. Furthermore, some Russian sources are saying that the Russians have already entered this area, and now we see that the Russians have the bridgehead in the railroad station. Possibly they have. Furthermore, possibly the Russians have penetrated this area and established control, and now we understand that Ukrainian forces that appeared in this salient currently are blocked by the Russians, and they don't have any other options but to step back, even without receiving any order from the Ukrainian military authorities. So I expect but from this piece of news that we received, that even maybe by the end of this weekend we might see this situation something like this, and this is a very possible situation. So the Russians have already, at least today, we received the first confirmation of this situation, that they managed to penetrate this northern part, enter the railroad station, and possibly they can establish control over this area even by the end of this weekend. We'll see whether the Russians are able to do this or not. But anyway, we see that the situation for the Ukrainians is very critical. The Russians continue pushing from the south, but without any progress on the ground for today, or at least we still haven't received any updates about that. The Russians continue their pushing from the west. They have already crossed the railroad ways and established a bridgehead in the railroad station, and just received confirmation about the penetration to the northern part. And as we discussed, the final battle for the central part, we can say that has started. Maybe that was the reason why the Ukrainians took a decision to send more reserves in this area. Who knows? But anyway, I believe that within the next few days we're going to understand the real situation. Furthermore, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes on Donetsk front line, mainly in the vicinity of Artyomovsk, the Ukrainians lost 300 soldiers, 10 armored vehicles, including 1 tank, and 3 artillery systems. So as you can see, the losses are still very heavy for the Ukrainians, and also some authorities from DPR, like the vice president or some assistant of the Apushilin, the head of DPR, report that the Ukrainians in Bakhmut are blocked. They are blocked and they don't have any possibilities to evacuate from this area. Furthermore, let's return one more time back to the situation with these 2 brigades of territory defense, brigades of 120s and 114s. As you can see, the Russians, we see that Ukrainians do have possibilities to move their reserves inside of Bakhmut. But we still haven't received any confirmed information about the situation that Ukrainians are able to evacuate forces from Bakhmut. And there are just 2 explanations of that. The first one is that all these brigades who entered Bakhmut stays in Bakhmut forever. I'm talking about that they will be destroyed there. Or the other situation is that they are no longer able to evacuate from Bakhmut because all the roads is under fire control. Very interesting. To tell the truth, from my perspective, as I understand, the Russians need to establish control over Artyomovsk as soon as possible. And if they are able not to allow the Ukrainians to send reserves inside Bakhmut, they need to prevent and they need to cut the supply roads and to concentrate over this area completely. Furthermore, one more time about the new Ukrainian tactics. They're destroying buildings, and as we see, there are a lot of buildings on the Russian way until the western part. Furthermore, I believe that the entire western part, this part, is mined by the Ukrainians, and every single building will be destroyed. And from my side, I have one question that can help us understand the purpose of battle for the western Bakhmut. And the question is, how many civilians are there? This is a very important question. This is the most important question that can change the entire situation of battle for Bakhmut. We believe and we used to think that the Russians are pushing and we don't understand the purposes of this push. What is the real reason? We see that Ukrainians destroying buildings. What is the reason to fight for the ruins? And to receive an answer to this question, we need to understand how many civilians left inside of Bakhmut. Inside of the western part of Bakhmut. And there are two answers. There are a lot of civilians and there are not so many civilians. I don't know, I can't tell you the numbers, like more 1,000 or less than 1,000. What is a lot of civilians for the Russians? What is not a lot of... But anyway, I will tell you, if the Ukrainians take a decision to destroy buildings and if there are not many civilians inside the western part of Bakhmut, I expect that the Russians, for the final storm of this area, will start using their flamethrower systems, as they did in Popasna. If you remember, not Popasna, in Peske. If you remember, at some certain point of time, the Russians started bombing this area with flamethrower systems, TOS-1, and after that, everything went very fast. So maybe the Russians will take the same decision as a result, as a reaction for the Ukrainian new tactic to destroy buildings. Now let's move to other front lines. And now let's talk about Avdiivka area. The Russians are saying, and let's return back to the Russian sources map. For these purposes, they have a lot of updates about that. As you can see, there are a lot of icons, and mainly the Russians were attacking Severna, Umanska. The Russians continue attacking Achertina and the area that located on the north of Avdiivka. And this area is under responsibilities of one of the most well-trained, experienced brigades, mechanized brigade in this area. I'm talking about 110th Brigade. And the Russians are saying that as a result of artillery duels, they destroyed at least one ammo depot of that brigade, 110th Brigade, and they destroyed few checkpoints, few position of accumulation of forces, and so on. But as you can see, also without any changes on the ground, Pervomaiska, some maps are showing that the Russians managed to clear the road that connects Avdiivka, that used to connect Avdiivka and Konstantinovka. And of course, I'm talking about this road. When talking about the western source map, we see that the Russians have already passed by this road, and there are now clashes in Novokalinovo and Keramik, and this is the only map that confirms this information. Most of the Russian maps says that they just reached the N20 road and they managed to clear this area. And of course, now the Russians have a lot of possibilities to attack in any direction, to the north, to complete encirclement of Avdiivka, or to attack Achertina, this logistic hub, this railroad hub that Ukrainians uses for supplying and supporting Avdiivka. Now let's go to the south, to Ugledar. As you can see, there are some duels, not much updates from this area, but there are a lot of updates, as you can see, on Zaporozhye. The Russians, we know that Ukrainians have already accumulated around 60,000 soldiers in this area. We can say that these forces are also, this area is also overpopulated with the Ukrainians. There are no big towns where the Ukrainians can hide their big army. So this is the reason they need to keep their forces in Zaporozhye and Dnipro, the main forces, and to keep just a small parts on the combat line. And they also, but because of the fact that the Russians managed to accumulate a lot of forces, the Ukrainians need at least to have like the same amount or a little bit less or something like this, and this allows the Russians to continue their bombing area because they're using their guided bombs in this area, and they're very successful. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Russians on these two areas, the Russians destroyed just 20 soldiers, 28 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system. But the Russians destroy a lot of ammo depots. They destroyed some headquarters in this area. They destroyed like convoys of Ukrainian forces. So pretty successful. At least the number of icons says that they're pretty active in this area. When talking about Kherson, there are very heavy clashes between these two banks of the river, between Novokakhovka, Kazatskaya, Berislav. So Berislav and Novokazatskaya is Ukrainian side, this is the Russian side, and they're like attacking each other from one side to another. The loss of Ukrainians is 35 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system. But this area is very active. Maybe the Ukrainians are going to use exactly this part of Dnieper River for some kind of crossing operation, for marine operation, to establish bridgehead in this area. We'll see. Now it's very difficult to understand what they're going to do. Very interesting updates are coming from Nikolaev and from this area. And I'm talking about the infrastructure. What I'm trying to say that some sources are saying that Ukrainians started restoring and repairing of Snegirivka logistic hub. If we take a look at the Western sources map, you're going to see that Snegirivka is one of the most important towns because there are at least one railroad that goes from Kherson to the mainland, another railroad that goes from Nikolaev through Snegirivka in direction of Dnipro and Zaporozhye. So now this railroad doesn't work because all the bridges are destroyed and so on. Currently, the Ukrainians are trying to intensify their works in this area, trying to restore the connections between these two areas. And the importance of this town is that in the like when talking about the upcoming counteroffensive operation, is that we understand that Ukrainians currently have just one port in Odessa, and it is not enough for the Ukrainian possibilities. They have a lot of grain, they have a lot of things to trade, to buy, and of course using seaports will allow them to intensify everything they have, and it will help them to maybe even to restore their mighty or something like this. And the best solution to increase the Ukrainian possibilities is to restore or unblock Nikolaevsky port. As you can see, there is a river and there is a port and there is a railroad station, but the Ukrainians can't do this because this area is under Russian control and it's blocked by the Russians. So they can't use anything in this area. And one of the possible things that the Ukrainians also want to achieve during their counteroffensive operation is to push the Russians from this bank, from this part of Kherson area, to unblock Nikolaev. And the things that they're currently restoring and doing a lot of repairing works in Snegirivka tells me that very soon the Ukrainians will do this, and this is the purposes of the things that they're doing right now. Also, now let's talk to the Kupiansk and Liman front line. There are a lot of icons, there are a lot of artillery duels, a lot of clashes and so on. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, the Ukrainians lost 115 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, 2 artillery systems. But the most important update, as we discussed, for I believe the nth time in a row, the Russians reported as a result of artillery duels, of their attacks, they managed to ruin another rotation process in this area. I'm not saying how exactly this situation, like how changed the entire game, but the thing is that the Russians repeat this situation every day, every single day. I believe that this is a very important piece of news. So we'll see. Of course, the main result, according to this situation, is the ground, how many square meters the Russians are able to take as a result of this break in the rotation process. But for now, we don't see any changes. But we understand that the Russians, by this break in this rotation process, are trying to prepare themselves before the greatest offensive operation in this area as well. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.